and it was once the home of the Duke of Queensberry, who was the main architect of the Treaty of Union of 1707 that united Scotland and England. So he'll be spinning in his grave now that his house is part of the newly reinstated Scottish Parliament. The Royal Mile is actually 5 separate streets. Abbey Strand is where the palace is. This section is called Canongate. It then becomes High Street, Lawn Market, and where the castle is at the top, Castle Hill. But altogether, it's known as the Royal Mile. Off to the right, you'll see the Canongate Kirk, or Canongate Church. This is the church the Queen uses when she stays at the palace. You see a golden stag's head with a golden cross and some real antlers at the top of the church there. And on the left-hand side, the yellow and red building, free to go inside, the Museum of Edinburgh. On the right, the building where the scaffolding is, with the oversized clock. The building itself is the old toll booth, dates back to the 1500s. It's where you paid your taxes, it's where the prison was, it's where the town council used to meet. Nowadays, it's a social history museum called The People's Story, again free to go inside. Edinburgh began directly ahead of us. There's some traffic lights here now, but there used to be a gate. It was called the Netherbow Port, because the old town was surrounded on 3 sides by a wall, which was 18 foot high and 6 foot thick. And on the 4th side, you had the Nor Loch. Now everybody of course wanted to live within the safety of those boundaries, and that caused problems. By the middle of the 1700s, almost 60,000 people were living in an area 3/4 of a mile long by half a mile wide. Now they couldn't build out the way, they had no alternative but to build up the way, so that's why the buildings were so tall. On the street front, on the Royal Mile, they were up to 6 stories high, but as they went down the sides of the slopes of the ridge where the old town sits, they were up to 14 stories high. As you go through the lights, look down to the left. At the bottom of the hill, you'll see part of the city wall dating back to the 1500s. There was no running water, there was no sanitation. Instead, you had a bucket. And as the day went by, I'm sure you can imagine, the bucket got fuller, fouler, smellier, nastier, till it had to go. If you lived on the ground floor, that's fine. You just opened your door, picked up the bucket, threw the contents into the close, and watched them slip, slide, run, trickle all the way down the hill. But if you lived higher up the building, you didn't want to have to carry the bucket down the stairs. So you opened your window, picked up the bucket and threw the contents into the street. This was a problem, especially if you were unlucky to be walking by when somebody tipped the bucket. So this being Edinburgh, nice genteel Edinburgh, we passed the Nastiness Act. That meant you could only dispose of your bucket of nastiness during the hours of darkness. The church bells rang, that was the signal, you came to your window, bucket ready, but before you threw the contents you had to shout a warning. It came from the French, garde à l'eau, look out for the water, but in the Scots it was corrupted to garde-l'eau, and if you heard someone shout that, if you were walking by, you were supposed to shout back, had your horn, hold your hand. That way they knew you were there and they wouldn't throw the bucket. Yeah, right. Can you imagine? You've just looked up to shout, and before you know it, you've been hit by something you wished you hadn't been. Edinburgh's nickname was Auld Reekie, which means Old Stinky or Old Smelly. And they say if the wind was blowing in the wrong direction, you could smell the town many miles before you reached it. Now, when the city began to grow outside the original boundaries of the old town, the developers